Mike.
Magandang hapon.
I am also proud to introduce no less the lawyer of lawyers, so to speak, the one who speaks to the heart of what matters to ordinary folks, and to a certain extent, look up to not only lawyers but also the academics. Let me introduce to you Dr. Attorney Professor Jimenez.
Feedback.
I am equally proud to introduce to you no less uh, someone from commented. It's also about explaining, what matters most as far as key issues are concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Mao Villar. Last but not the least is our next presenter. Good friend of mine, decades now, uh, and a leading cybersecurity expert, not only in Europe, but also consulted by different organizations in different countries, different governments. He's been with us in the country, the Philippines, when he was just starting his career, and he's now leading his own organization based in Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Dr. Sven. With that, I give it the floor. I've not just introduced myself. I'm Ben Tayal from Peers, and I will be your MC this afternoon, and hopefully we'll hear from you online as you ask your questions to our resource person and our members of the panel. We also acknowledge the presence of BWI in this event. Magandang hapon po ulit. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Can feedback.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for having me here today. It's always an honor and a pleasure to come back to the Philippines, where I started with my career and seeing how developments are going on here. I wanted to give a bit of an input to cybersecurity, cyber threats we are seeing right now. And to start with, what is cybersecurity from our perspective? With threat, especially the state, not only cyber threats, but also the government are or could potentially doing fulfilling our as the government. And different way to tackle for like service people, so we do follow and we do where we I think it's first for me, Professor Dayal introduced me. I'm doing a cybersecurity program at the interface technology security in Berlin, with offices in Paris and Brussels, tech topics, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, disinformation, and in the past, I worked for government for French Foreign Office and for German Special Cybersecurity Agency, where I left a couple of years ago to join the and help hopefully position data, especially of the public and media, to better understand our topic and to answer all the questions to make government policies. So, when cybersecurity, cybersecurity in, you can log into your account availability. Part of what one key aspect that I want to bring up, and I think we can already move 2 slides ahead. We can already move ahead. If we're looking at the resilience slide.
Late YouTube cuts ito.
We turned off the microphone because it's echoing.
One more.
Sir, dito ka na.
Yeah.
That's YouTube.
Right.
This is the actual, and that's the YouTube.
Can I change it?
Here.
All right, good. All right.
So let's
Mm.
it
You,
will take a second. Yeah.
that's YouTube. It takes 5 to 10 minutes.
All right. I just want to quickly show you that slide again, which I mentioned. In the core, you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and around that, you have all these other aspects that make cybersecurity. And then one of the core concepts that you should be familiar with is, yes, of course, you want to make sure that you defend yourself against the cyber operation, against someone trying to scam you. You know, like, all of that is good. We want to prevent that. We want to protect ourselves. But part of the truth is there will always be cyber attacks, cyber operations that will be successful. So no matter what you do, no matter how good you are, you have to always prepare for the worst case. The worst case is that criminals or intelligence agencies will be able to exploit vulnerabilities, will be able to reach your company, to reach your government agency, and you have to be prepared for that. And that we can call it part of civil defense, you can call it resilience, you can call it cyber resilience, but what it means basically is that as soon as there is a successful operation against you, you acknowledge it, you try to limit the damage it can do, you fix the vulnerability, and you get everything that it needs to be operational running as fast as possible again. Like, think about your hospital. The first thing you want to do if you're breached by a cyber operation is you want to make sure that no person is harmed. And if there are some services that are interrupted, that you need to get online again, make sure that no one is hurt, that's the first one to get online again, get operational again. You can do all the rest later on. But if you're resilient enough, that means that you can continue operations almost without disruptions, or keep the disruptions as short as possible. So, what are the baddies? Like, who are the bad guys that don't like that we have cybersecurity? Well, technically, we have three big groups. And we have criminals, cyber criminals. They want to make money. They want to make money as easy as possible. So they don't try hard to get into very secure stuff, such as banks, right? Because they just want to make money as fast as possible. If they can make money by targeting the ordinary citizen, they will do that. If they can make more money trying to go into local government units and ask for ransom because they collected the data and tell them they can only get the data back once they pay the ransom money, then they will do that. If they know that they get more money from small and medium enterprises, they will go after them. Our criminals don't care about values, about hitting right target in terms of they have one target, they don't make money. It's easy as possible. It doesn't differentiate them from other criminals. You have state actors, you have military agencies, you have intelligence agencies, you have police agencies, also trying to compromise certain networks, like infrastructures in other countries, for example. Then you have other non-state actors. You have partisan groups, you have hacktivists, you have rebels, you have universities that are connected to state agencies that try to help them out. So you have a bunch of other actors, but ultimately, what we want to look at, if we're looking at what should the Philippine government do about something, where are they on quote unquote the spectrum of state responsibility? Like how close are they to a government? And let's say, well, why are some guys from a university hacking us? You figure out they're actually very closely affiliated with government agencies in another country. So then it's not like a university, some students trying to compromise the infrastructure. It is that government leveraging non-state actors such as universities or companies to do that. Criminals are also affiliated with government agencies sometimes. A lot of Russian cyber criminals have connections to the government. Why do they have that? Because as long as they don't do anything against Russia or its allies, they can stay and have a safe haven in Russia. So they can compromise companies in Europe, in Western Europe, for example, and law enforcement in Russia will not do anything about them. Right? So it's an agreement. We see Chinese cyber criminals who, during the day, they work for government agencies in China, and at night, they use other tools and their knowledge to make a bit of money, so they become criminals at night, so-called moonlighting. So that's why you have actors, they are not completely separate from each other, they overlap, they're interconnected, and at the end of the day, if you look for a government response, you will always look at, well, how closely are they connected to what kind of government, who do they work for? And of course, if you are a citizen or a company, normally don't really care about that, you care about how you can protect yourself, defend yourself, and try to get everything running again, and everything else is supposed to be the government that is taking care of supporting you on that. Well, why do we have this event on cybersecurity? Because threats are increasing, threats are increasing fast. You have here like a timeline of threats from a German-based statistics dashboard, and you can see here, well, yes, these type of threats, and they're increasing over time. So it's a prevalent issue, it's an emerging issue. We look at artificial intelligence becoming more and more prevalent, or machine learning enabled software becoming more prevalent. Of course, it comes with more vulnerabilities, it comes with more breaches, attack surface. So also there, we're going to see an ever-increasing number of cyber threats. If we look at, for example, the landscape, how it evolved. In the beginning, there was the internet. right from the beginning of the internet, you basically already had political espionage, you had economic espionage, you had militaries trying to exploit it. Later on, we had sabotage operations, for example, the very famous Stuxnet operation, which was a Israeli-American corporation to halt the nuclear enrichment program in Iran. So they made sure that the centrifuges in Iran, in Natanz, were spinning out of control, so that the researchers in Iran didn't know what hit them, and they were like, our program's not working, what are we doing wrong? You had, in the military use case, you had Operation Orchia, for example, which was the Americans, or the Israelis in that case, shutting down air defenses, type operations, so they can carry out airstrikes without using any one of the fighter jets. And then we have, of course, huge surveillance operations. One of the most famous ones is, of course, the Golden Shield project, also known as the Great Firewall of China, which was initially developed as a database for the police, and later on turned into a full-scale surveillance program to make sure that Chinese government can control in and outflow of data into Chinese waters and outside of that. And then most recently, what we've also seen is, of course, the influencing of society, the influencing of elections, subversion of democratic institutions that is enabled by cyber threats. And apart from crime, apart from individuals and companies suffering from cybercrime, which is pretty straightforward, and most likely one of us has experienced that at some point, that your account was blocked, or you transferred money to someone that you were supposed to transfer money to, you were scammed. In all of that, we heard stories, either we were affected directly or indirectly, our friends or family were affected. But cyber threats that we're not talking much about, and that goes to my point of why we need to look at the state nexus and how much governments are involved in that. A number of things. Let's start with political trade negotiations. So if I'm interested in a business deal, and maybe I want to make a better offer, or stop a merger and acquisition, I might conduct a cyber operation and see what they are trading, what they're negotiating, what the balance sheets are, and things that no one is talking publicly about that help to get an upper hand. You also have espionage targeting domestic policy making. Like, if I want a bill not to be passed, maybe compromise the smartphone of a senator, of a congressman, and I will try to figure out where they stand, what are the bills they drafted, who are their political allies, who are they cooperating with. And the easiest way to do that is by compromising their laptop or their phone, right? Same goes for business development, intellectual property. If I want to get something out of a company, maybe I have a cyber operation against that. Why is that? Because normally we don't really know how to react to cyber operations. Oh yeah, companies will not disclose anything because they are afraid that the public will say like, oh no, we're not going to buy from them anymore. They were hacked. It's really bad. It's a stigma. So they're not talking about that. It's difficult to run police and law enforcement agencies against this because normally the perpetrators of these crimes and these operations are based in other countries, and these countries don't want to cooperate with you to find them. So it's a very low entry barrier for criminals and intelligence agencies to conduct those operations, and they could gain a lot out of that. And then on the really high end, we are of course going to see military espionage, for example, to know what are the plans, what are the deployment plans, which plans should we protect, which are they deploying the troops to, active operations as well as planning stages. And the last one, on the high end there is something that we've seen in the last couple of years, especially with Russian operations against the Ukraine, but also with Chinese operations, for example, against US targets and allegedly also European targets, is that you're pre-positioning to disrupt critical civilian and military infrastructures in case of war, in case of conflict. So that by the point war breaks out or the conflict gets hot, you will be able to shut down power grids, you will be able to shut down water supply. You cannot do that from one second to the other. You shoot a missile and then a couple of minutes later it hits. You need to prepare. It takes up to 6 months, 9 months to prepare such a cyber operation. So we will do that ahead of time, and you will pre-position yourself in those critical networks. And especially here in the Philippines, if you remember, I was saying that there's geopolitical aspects to cybersecurity. Let's look at one of those, which is obviously Chinese cyber campaigns. And we're running our own tracking Chinese cyber campaigns, ecosystems, everything that is going on. And you can see that the Philippines is frequently targeted by Chinese cyber campaigns. And that's not like something that, oh my God, no one knows about that. It's like sharing classified information. It's out there. There's so many security companies tracking those incidents that I think 2010, 2011 already. If you see new campaigns, they're tracked to certain state nexuses of Chinese threat actors that target Southeast Asian targets, including the Philippines. There's a rich body of analysis out there that states that. And it's something that we all know. And again, they're not really doing something sustainably about that. And then you were like, yeah, but you know what? I mean, there's so many countries, there's so many targets. Well, I'm sure, like, for example, if we look at China, the Chinese threat actors, they can't compromise anyone. I mean, maybe they don't want to try the Philippines. No, we're not. If you look, and there's a couple of reports out there that put the puzzle pieces together. If you look at the ecosystem that China has created in the last 15 years to enable cyber operations, it's vast. Creating the talent through universities, hacking contests and bug bounties to find vulnerabilities and the best malware that they can get of researchers and then utilize them in their own cyber operation, to bringing in cybersecurity companies and other companies to run cyber operations on the behalf of the government. We have the ISO Leaks, it's a company in China that was running cyber operations. And when they found data, they were like going to the government and like, hey, we got some data on whatever space research. You want to get that from us? You want to buy that from us? You have universities in that space. You have entire national legislation which basically says if you find a vulnerability in software or hardware, the first person to tell that to is the government. If you don't do that, you get penalties, you get fined, you might end up in prison. Why do you have to tell that to the government? Well, because they want to look at it and maybe they want to utilize it in one of the cyber operations. There's an entire, it's called the Chinese vulnerability database, an entire racket of companies in different brackets, depending on how much services in offensive cyber operations they provide to the government. You have cyber militia units all over the country. It is a huge structured ecosystem enabling offensive cyber operation capabilities. And while, for example, the militia units are really more tasked for war scenarios, all the rest is conducting operations on a day-to-day basis. And where does it leave us? I mean, you can argue, well, that's what we say in German, Realpolitik. That's real politics. That's how things are done. Like, you spy, you conduct cyber operations. And what we do about that, that's true. At the same time, what should frighten us is that if you talk, for example, about military buildup, there was these talks about, war between China and the US and yada, yada, yada. And one of the compelling arguments for the US is always that the US has been conducting so many military operations in the last decades that they know how to fight wars because they're actually fighting wars. And if you look at Chinese cyber operations, they know really well how to conduct cyber operations because, of course, they're conducting them on a daily schedule. So their capabilities are not only quantity, but also quality pretty good. They can conduct a large number of low-scale cyber operations, target lots of secret topics, and they can also conduct high intensity, high-quality cyber operation against even hardened targets. So, and that's just one threat actor from the geopolitical aspects that might and is targeting the Philippines. So if you look at all of that, I want to conclude on cybersecurity is already extremely important for national security, not only in the Philippines, but everywhere. So you need to protect and defend your IT infrastructure, especially those for critical infrastructures, government agencies, corporations, but you will also need to create resilience so that in case you get breached, you know what to do and you know how to get it back up running. Some damage will be done, that's true, but at least you will be able to mitigate even more damage. But on the other hand, you also learn what to do and how to handle those day-to-day operations because all of us in Europe, in the United States, have become too accustomed with oh yeah, another Chinese cyber operation, oh yeah, another Iranian cyber operation. It is really high time to do something about it. That I want to thank you again so much for having me here and looking forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Sven. You see, as you will got from the presentation of Dr. Sven, he gave us more of this a more comprehensive view of cybersecurity. We can ask him about more specific activities that we should really be worried as far as the country, the Philippines is concerned, and the region as a whole. No? But meanwhile, we have panel reactors for this purpose, and most especially to somehow relay the message of the observations of our resource person to the public. Let me start with Mike Cervera, the lead political pundit, as I've explained to you, so that at least his followers will be able to better understand the threat of cybersecurity in the country. Mike?
Yon, good afternoon po kay Attorney DJ, kay Prof, sa mga nanonood ngayon sa ating live. Oo.
Just translate to him.
Oo. Nakakatuwa kasi may ganitong pagtitipon para mas maunawaan natin ang mga bagay-bagay na nangyayaring ginagawa sa atin ng mga iba't ibang elemento ng ibang bansa para tayo lamangan sa mga pagkakataon na hindi natin nalalaman. At least ngayon ay nagagawa na natin na ma-educate ang ating mga kababayan nang sa ganon, hindi tayo nagiging ignorante sa mga ginagawa ng mga dayuhan na pilit tayong nilamangan, sabi ko nga kanina, at pilit tayong niloko sa mga bagay-bagay na propaganda nila.
Salamat. Thank you for that, Mike. Now I'm going to give the floor to our lawyer for the masses. You know, what's important really as far as cybersecurity is concerned is the necessary policies that the government must come up with to respond to and address the challenges of cybersecurity, including existing regulations that, in fact, should already be put to good use as far as the government is concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you no less than Pinoy street lawyer, Attorney DJ Jimenez.
Thank you very much, Prof. And first and foremost, we wish to express our gratitude to Professor Smith for very educational and nerve-wracking revelations of how cyber security is affecting not only the world, but no less than the Philippines. Now, sir, the data that you presented earlier, I suppose, did not yet even contain the emerging technologies of AI. And given this AI technology, and I'd like to reiterate what I also say, information technology can both be a blessing, but it can both be a heaven, but it can also be a hell. So, based on your experience and your research, sir, um, what are the best practices in Europe that you think the Philippines should integrate in the fight against cyber security and information misinformation? Presently, we have in the Philippines the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012. So imagine 2012. I suppose there is really a need to revisit this law that we've had since 2012. Apart from very few legislation that addresses misinformation, we have the law on libel and some other very minor laws. Now, it would truly help our government if you could suggest some practices or best measures that you think can be adopted in the field. So, what are those you think may be considered?
Thank you so much for the question. I think I gave you like 5 things, 2 of them which are best practices that I think we're doing well, and 3 of them which we are not doing well, but I would love that someone else is actually doing it well.
Uh-huh.
The first thing is regulation, forcing your critical infrastructures to adapt to security minimum standards. Because if you're a company and you're not putting in any security, you gambling and you might it might pay off, it might not, you might get compromised and you lose money, right? It's business, right? I mean, you're responsible for your own business. When it comes to critical infrastructure, so those providing power, water, not only your money that you are gambling with, which you are entitled to your business, but you are basically taking the chance away from essential services to be run. And that means that society will suffer and people might die. So critical infrastructures, there need to be legislation to make sure that these critical infrastructure providers have minimum IT security standards in place.
So, mandatory cyber security mechanisms.
Yeah, for those providing essential services.
Or those in the providing public utilities.
Yeah.
Public service.
Water, electricity, hospitals. Waste, one. Second one is create a strong national cybersecurity agency.
Which we have. Earlier, I'd like to inform the public that the executive director of the CICC, the Cybercrime Investigation of the Philippines, is here. So we have that agency.
Send it one cybercrime to make sure that they are the powerhouse for consulting businesses on what best practices to use, what minimum requirements, for Congress to come up with good bills, like having really a powerhouse national cybersecurity agency.
So empower this CICC.
Yes. Widen their authority. Yes.
And in Europe, well, how do you call that?
We call it National Cybersecurity Agency. And for example, look at it. Germany, for example, has a National Cybersecurity Agency, more than 1,800 staff. And that's on top of cyber counterintelligence
Or region.
for the national level, right? And then I think 3 things that you should do better and you should also be doing. One is collect intelligence on what's actually going on, like situational awareness, and mandate companies and government agencies to report breaches. Because how are we going to pass good laws and good best practices if we don't even know what's going on in our country, right? If you don't have an overview, you don't have a certificate of the country and the breaches of incident, you cannot pass good laws, you cannot improve laws. Second one is talent. The Philippines has great talent in IT security, but we have to make sure that they get the education they need, or they get whatever certification they need to go to business sectors, to go to government, to help the government unit secure their network. So you have one of the prime partner conferences in Southeast Asia, maybe in Asia, here in the Philippines, leverage that more and work on the entire pipeline, because no country in the world right now has enough cybersecurity, if you ask them. And the last point is pretty basic, and that's what we've always been thinking at. And it doesn't matter how good your regulation is, operational implementation, what does it mean? Patching my vulnerabilities, securing my infrastructure, running up-to-date systems. That sounds so boring, it's absolutely not sexy, but it's the most important thing. We had, and I will leave it at that. We had an analysis which was in summer of last year in Germany, where it states that most important data centers in Germany, where we run our government services, which are essential, especially in the case of conflict or war. Like the stuff that you should absolutely protect, right? None of them had tested if they can restore their systems from backup. And restoring your systems from a backup is the most essential, most elementary, most basic cybersecurity measure. And our most important data centers didn't do the most elemental thing, right? And that's where we really need to start. You can have all the talent, all the regulation, all the political whatever in the world. As long as you don't put your money where your mouth is, and you actually implement those measures with perseverance and with good quality, then all of that will be better.
Earlier, you also emphasized, Professor, that the geopolitical aspect of cybercrime, which is very important because narratives are being distorted. And to address things like this, usually have legislation to penalize the peddlers of fake news. Now, based on your study in Europe, how do they address this? Because, of course, we all know that free speech is not only constitutional, but it is also a human right. So, how do you draw the line? How is this being addressed in other jurisdictions?
So again, for platform regulation and this information, I would normally refer to my colleagues. But my personal opinion on this is that in Europe we have created a legal framework that allows us to use companies such as Meta or Google or whatever, and to help them or force them to prove their standards on the content they take down and everything. So as a caveat is, it's not enough, and it will never. Which means at the end of the day, you will have this information being circulated on. And I think that with all the love I have for the social media use in the country, for example, honestly, I would see the successful attempt at limiting or mitigating the damage, the sustained damage to society carried out through social media platforms, which means it weakens the fabric of society. I mean, alone, even if it's not adversarial, right? I mean, adversarial means like we have like some government that wants to influence elections in the country, and then you do that, right? Even just by going online, spending hours on it, trying to see like, oh, other people's lives is better than mine. I should do something. Maybe I should get into Prime because I have more money to buy the new iPhone because everyone online has that. All of that weakens the fabric of society. There's so much negative impact on society that I have not seen any regulation anywhere in the world that actually addresses the problem to the extent where you can say like, yeah, I think now we're in a good place and it doesn't do a lot of damage. I think we have the extremes where you say like, okay, we want to do anything, or we're gonna block all social media use, or we need to improve existing regulations. And I think Europe has some of the most advanced regulations to deal with platforms and the spread of misinformation, hate speech, and that. But I tell you also that it's not enough. So I'm sure I can recommend that approach. It's a baseline. If you want to start there.
Or maybe just a final note, we cannot just rely on the government and legislation. We as a people will have to do our share After all, criticism is good, but offering solutions would be better, and working hard in resolving the problem would be best. So it's a private public partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our Pinoy street lawyer. Now I give the floor to Pierce own data analyst, Mr. Nico Tayo, because as a Pin been really closely monitoring various information being peddled not only in social media but also in traditional media. So let me give you Mr. Nico Tayo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the time. It's a great honor to have one of Europe's foremost experts on cybersecurity with us today. So I'll take the opportunity to ask perhaps much more geopolitical perspectives on what he thinks about cybersecurity, what that means for, shall we say, more of the average Joe. And I'd like to start off as well before with Dr. Slide specifically on threat actors. It's definitely one thing to say that there are threat actors in our cyberspace that need to be focused on, who can do this, etc., or perhaps which countries, who has the capability to do them. But I wanted to kind of ask, ask the good professor's comments on the plausible deniability of these actors. So, for example, it's rare when like for example, one country says, "Oh, I did this cybersecurity operation that targeted X of infrastructure on country B," but you have so many different threat actors in the cyberspace that are much more, shall we say, dynamic and not necessarily allied to one particular country or one particular organization. They're much more dynamic. So, for example, when there is an attack targeted to one specific country that targets, let's say, energy infrastructure. But if you look at their online presence, if they have it at all, they can say, "Oh, I'm not actually allied to one specific country or organization or whoever." However, it does specifically greatly benefit one country or actor sometimes, but given that there's this plausible deniability between the actor who did it and the person or the country benefiting, they can kind of say, "Oh, this wasn't me. I just benefited from it, but thank you very much, perhaps." So there's this. Given the dynamism of the environment that cyberspace is in, I was wondering how perhaps we could kind of make sense of this. And this is something that I'd like to ask to start off the good German expert that we have today.
That's a good question. I mean, what you're looking at is like a technical attribution, right? How confident am I that this type of operation was carried out by an actor belonging or working with their government? And it is hard work, it's complex work. It has gotten better over the years, but you also have to understand that we're talking a billion-dollar industry of cybersecurity companies and IT companies working for that. And that's one reason why, when we look at technical attribution, it has gotten better and why we could trust more of them. The second point is that I think one of the walks like duck and walks like I don't know, call it that. But you know, like you can see from what is targeted, who can benefit from it. Like, you know, if someone compromises the German local administration enough money, and if you give them money, they give you the data back. The most probably is 95% probability from the Russian-based cybercrime actors. Like, that's pretty much straightforward. It's not like, oh, maybe it's like someone in India who's pretending to Russian now. Also, on top of that, these what you mentioned with the plausible deniability or like third party connection, fourth party connection, where people this type of threat actor who's maybe Chinese pretends to be Indian when they do something. It happens sometimes, but you can count it on one or two hands how many times it actually occurred. where we have public information about that. So we have on one hand pretty high capability and development in operations in the text. On the other hand, you have, well, if it looks like crime, it looks like is crime. It looks like some very well actor that tries to put a backdoor into a military system in Guam. It's most probably a Chinese government affiliated actor. And because you have a vast variety of countermeasures, such as espionage, counter-espionage, trade deals, diplomatic measures, all of them don't require the burden of proof that you would require, for example, for criminal prosecution in a court of law. You know, if I'm 75% confident that it was Russians, and I'm willing to go toe to toe with them, I'm going to ask the Russian ambassador to come to us and say that they did it. You know, even if they will say that, oh, it wasn't us, whatever, but you don't have to have definite proof. And you can do economic sanctions based on that. People actually developed toolbox on dealing with this kind of thing. So, in the end of the day, yes, it is not without challenges, but when we see that, especially of course coming from Russia and China, is oh no, it wasn't us. It's really old very fast when they mentioned the hundreds times within 2 years. It was probably more than 50 or 4 times it was actually done. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's something for public discourse, and it doesn't really change any dynamics, and they are really.
Speaking of public discourse, thank you for the comment. I mean, in the firm, perhaps we have the blessing or burden, depending on how you want to spin it, about how we can actively track media in the firm. And it's one of my primary responsibilities to see specific mentions and kind of see the traction it gets. Is it positive? Is it negative? Where does it usually come from? What does it say about a plethora of different things that we can kind of track? And the reason why I bring this up is because there's a specific tool there, rightfully called Pathfinder, that is quite interesting. So, for example, there's and I'll do my best to visually explain this. And the reason why I bring it up is because of how dynamic social media right now in the Philippines is. So, for example, there's a topic. Let's say, I don't want to name a specific topic. Let's say somebody wants to talk about the color blue, and then it's posted on YouTube, and then a lot of people seem to like the color blue, but like some people are saying, "Oh, this doesn't look blue. This looks purple. This looks green, etc." And then this tool of ours sees just how much traction this topic gets over time. So like say, for example, I posted that using YouTube specifically under Reels, but there's a bunch of people who commented on this. And then they relate it to something else, like, oh, what about color theory? What about this kind of thing? So basically what I'm trying to say is, let's say you want to talk about a specific topic, let's say flood control. Somebody talks about it and says, oh, I think flood control is 1, 2, 3. And then somebody gives a comment that specifically perhaps favors one political actor and the other. And the reason why I bring this specific topic up is because of our ability to kind of track it, we see so many posts that are not necessarily from legitimate accounts. When you see them and then you open this link, there's absolutely nothing there. There's 0 followers, 0 nothing, and then it's as if it came out of thin air. And it wouldn't be a scary or perhaps concerning thing, but we track thousands of these every single week, and it changes every single day. And it gets even more interesting when one particular group or a conglomerate of groups starts to act in such a way that it feels as if there's an agenda. And the reason why I bring this up is because in the conversations of cybersecurity and basically about this in the threat landscape, it's kind of very easy to get caught in this web. So for example, a normal person that wants to go on social media, how can I protect myself from these, shall we say, false waves of information? I mean, I'm sure you, what's this, a while ago you mentioned if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, maybe it is a duck, but perhaps it's not so easy when you just see like a comment on social media and then I think exactly like that, but this post is from a completely false account. But I want to believe it, but I shouldn't believe it. And unfortunately, I see a lot of this all the time. And I was wondering for this particular way, how do you shield yourself if you can even do such a thing?
Those are the fundamental of misinformation. I think, so personally, if you ask me personally, I just deleted those messages account because you see posts, and for most of them, maybe you know it's fake news or it's disinformation, right? But it creates doubt. Every single post that you see, and you see it over time, not only a day, days, weeks, months. So at some point you're asking yourself, oh no. There's not like all of a sudden you're like, oh no, that's fake, I don't believe that. It is more nuanced, and it changes your time. It changes down in certain topics, in your opinion, in your own way to assess things. It's really tricky. That is on one hand. And on the other hand, something that I've been asking quite a lot, but how do you measure impact? Like, yes, you say, well, you're tracking the uptake of certain topics and everything. That's the only way of meaningfully, I think, objectively right now to look at data. Because you're going to go like, oh, Sven, did you see that post? I was like, yeah. Oh, that was wrong. Did you after see that post believe in that? I'm like, oh yeah, that post changed my opinion. There's no real way to measure the impact these things have. And that creates both sides problems. On the side of defending it, it creates a problem because you're like, well, if I have to justify budget, then I have to quantify, right? I have to tell consumers, I want to have like 10 million for this or 100 million for this because it changed the votes for 10% of our population. But you don't have this. You won't be able to assess this. So you don't have data on this. And at the same time, while we don't have data on this, you cannot say that it doesn't impact because of the first point that I made, that we're all honest. It's proven online. You have seen things that created doubt. You see that every day. So that happens to everyone. And if you put these two things together, then we're in a very problematic environment because we cannot quantify the problem, but we know that the problem is there. And yes, we have to do more research on that. We have to get better with that. Right now, I don't have an answer. That's why my initial answer was I'm just stating as much as possible because I have not figured out how to become more resilient about that. Because even if you want, and that's my last quote, even if you say, like, oh, I saw this, so I'm going to talk to that smartphone, right? And he comes up with something you discovered with me. I'm spending so much of my energy and time verifying something that someone put on social media. That's not worth the energy. And then also, again, I find it in society, this is the fabric of society, but we don't know how much. That's a huge challenge.
I guess I thank you for the comments and then open the floor for.
Thank you, Nico, for that very insightful comments. There are a number of bloggers affiliated with us who would like to ask some questions. I'm not a part of the panel, but I have my own question later. We have more guests from the media who I expect a number of questions as well to ask our resource person, particularly those specific to the issues that are very relevant to the country today. But meanwhile, let me give the floor to our associate, Mr. Aaron De Leon, to ask his question.
Okay. Sven, apologies, I wasn't able to physically make it, but thank you for the presentation. And
For a bit, there's quite a lag online. There you are.
and hi, Sven. Nice to see you again, and thank you for the very extensive presentation that.
Aaron, we cannot hear you. Let us have the audio fixed.
Hold on. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Sa kanya yun, sa kanya po, bro.
Here.
Hindi po, sa kanya po. Hindi siya marinig.
Must put the headset.
Can you hold on? Can you hear me now?
Ayun doon. Kaya ano mo na lang. Okay, naka-off yung microphone.
Yan po. Sir Aaron?
Hindi madinig. Anyway, while we're fixing the audio of our associate, it would seem that the taking off from the two reactors, we Filipinos and the country for that matter, is not really in. One, we have very weak public institutions, and as we were talking about the issues in preparation for today's event, we have listed a number of issues that simply suggest one important vulnerability of the country's public institutions. But at the same time, again, based on the discussion, it would seem that another challenge that seems to highlight this vulnerability is the difficulty in pinpointing the origin and the responsibility of any act as far as cyber security is concerned, whether it's disinformation, misinformation, or malinformation. And definitely, as mentioned by our resource person, whether we like it or not, these are already true and are actually happening in the country today. So, in other words, does that mean that we are actually helpless when it comes to this issue? Because we've seen how Russia made preparations before it actually decided to take over Ukraine. And I know for a fact that you and your group have been monitoring the developments as far as Ukraine issue is concerned. And I suppose that precisely the fact that it happened in Ukraine, albeit that you're talking of different actors, it doesn't prevent a similar scenario happening in the region, particularly in the Philippines, considering other actors also involved and surely have the technical and organizational capacity to do so. So, what would be your recommendations, not only as far as the government is concerned, but also as far as individual Filipinos are concerned, Dr. Smith?
I think one of the things we need to raise awareness of the issue. Because usually when it goes wrong, it's not really something that where things explode and people die, and it's very obvious that there was something that happened. That's why we've come to accept the fact that there's attempts to IT infrastructure all the time. The National Cybersecurity Office of Taiwan actually issued their new report this morning, where they specify how many breach attempts they see per day from originating from China. And if you look at that, it's astonishing, and it is a high quantity of those operations. Yet the public outcry about it is not as you would expect. So I think raising the awareness for the issue both with decision makers and the general public is a good first step. The second step would then be to create situational awareness picture of what's actually going on in the country. Because again, just individual incidents and some personal exceptions don't make the entire picture. So you need to create a situation awareness. And I always had that, of course, with regulation because those companies don't want what's happening to them. And then based off that, you can implement very specific actions. Who's going to do what? But let me tell you again, cybersecurity is no sorcery, it's no magic. We know what we need to do. We know it for 20 years. It's not like it's very complicated. It's actually very simple. We just need to do the basic security measures, which is backups, patch management, asset management, vulnerability management. Go to any agency in this country, in the other countries, ask them if they know exactly what computers they are using, how many licenses they have for their software. They don't know that. If you don't know what you're using, you cannot know where they are vulnerable, and then you cannot protect it. So again, it's the basics that we need to start, but we need situational awareness and we need urgency, knowing that these things are going on every day.
Thank you for that, Dr. Sven. Finally, I suppose our online participants can now ask a question. Do we have Aaron?
Yes.
Okay, Aaron, go ahead.
Yes, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, so Sven, thank you very much. Dr. Sven, thank you very much for the extensive presentation on cybersecurity. And I've noted in one of the slides that you've mentioned, you have enumerated the various cyber threats to the Philippines belonging to the infrastructure sector. It is important to note that there are many Chinese state funded enterprises that would include contractors that are building critical infrastructure for the country that is for both public and private clients. So that presupposes that we are already in a position that we are compromised, so to speak, in terms of they are knowledgeable in terms of these infrastructures, how these infrastructures are developed. And we have also noted from the recent budget that has been assigned by the president that the funds that have been dedicated specifically to confidential funds and also in terms of investment in digital infrastructure, I don't think are sufficient. So my question would really be, how do the other countries, particularly governments, spend on hard and soft infrastructure in order to deter? Say, for example, you mentioned in one of your slides that there are Chinese cyber operations that are already targeting several government agencies, and we have also experienced here in the Philippines that the best IT people are being what do you call this, courted out of government agencies and are being taken in by private enterprises. So, question is, how should the government approach its digital strategy in terms of cybersecurity, and what are the best practices or the benchmarks that we can use in nearby countries or in other developed countries in order to guide the actions of our government?
Thank you, very nice. Great seeing you again, hearing you again. Um, that is, I mean, that's funny because even though a couple of months ago, I think it was 4 months ago, what we learned is that no other than the United States Ministry of Defense was actually using contractors, and the contractors were using contractors, and the people working on the Ministry of Defense networks were actually in China. Chinese citizens working on the US military defense networks, right? So, yes, if you look at that, David Huawei, ZTE contractors, a company, if you want to disconnect, detach from a country like China, it's absolutely, I would say, possible. If you are, for example, the US, that's very difficult enough because, for example, they banned Huawei some time ago. Germany, for example, still hasn't managed to do that. And if you're a country that's so interconnected with China, like the Philippines, they're like disconnecting from the US and from China when it comes to hardware software. I would say near impossible. So I don't want to leave you on that negative note. And as a course of action, and you ask me what the course of action should be, is you need to prioritize. You need to see what are the areas that are extremely critical and where it's very urgent that we start now to disconnect them from certain geopolitical powers. And then we start working down that list. And that's going to be a very long list, and you're not going to make it very far down the list. So you will look at military networks and infrastructure first. You will look at law enforcement and intelligence. You will look at providing software and hardware for Congress, for Senate. And if you are there, then you can go down the government and private lists of entities, critical infrastructure, for example. And if you can achieve a disconnect there or a mitigation of possible impact there, then I guess we already have 2040. It's very hard work because we haven't done that for too long. And now everything is interconnected, everything is integrated. And to basically create some kind of mitigation here, yeah, it's going to be a long road, but well, you're not going to get on the road if you don't start, right? So, very basic standard management, I would say you look at where you are interconnected, look at where the priority is super high that you, for example, not depend on US software or on Chinese software, and then you substitute it with other solutions. Maybe not even the entire network. You say that, well, look, we're not gonna get any all the American and Chinese software out of Congress, but maybe out of certain subcommittees. Or you know what, maybe it's not gonna happen. So whenever we're offering any devices, like phones and anything, into meetings, it is a risk assessment, prioritization, and then risk mitigation approach. But you will never achieve it if you say like, oh yeah, let's all stop using whatever Chinese software, right? It's not going to happen. So you will have to have a priority list, and you will have to make risk assessments. So that's you have to get into details and decide that well, some parts of that network will be designed differently, or they will be happening, so we're not connected to the internet, and other parts will be because that's the only way you can do it right now.
Okay. I don't know if that's good news or not, but definitely it leaves a lot more challenges than answers. Let me segue to the open forum and acknowledge our friends from the media. Perhaps if there's a question from DWIZ, we can entertain the questions. Okay. We also have a guest from Manila Times. We have a question.
I like the reactions from the ask people.
All right. Online, there's a question from Angel Pienza, no? One of our friends from Grand Ambito and Vantage Point Media. And her question is, goes, how vulnerable is the Philippines compared to its ASEAN neighbors when it comes to cyber threats? And related to that, it is how exposed are our critical infrastructure, power, water, transport, and cyber sabotage?
Good question. Look, I don't have the data, and I think it would be quite dishonest to maybe estimate specifically for the Philippines and in comparison to other countries. When I'm asked, like, where's the best practice in another country, I will always tell them, well, it took me 15 years to carry out in our country. I'm not arrogant enough to understand because this country. But if the Philippine infrastructure is similar to those other countries, and I believe it is, then you will face which means like basic something. We're having a very complex tech stack, which means lots of software running on lots of hardware, lots of legacy stuff that has never been updated. Some things that if you touch it breaks down, so we just don't look at it wrongly and we just let it go, but then it's very vulnerable. So without going specifics for the Philippines or the neighbors, I assume in general there's a huge attack surface, they have a wide variety of vulnerabilities, and looking at it from the threat perspective, well, if China's your rival, then it's not great, you know. So because of the resources. So I say similar to a lot of countries, I would assume gut feeling wise and interpolating from what I know about other countries that there's definitely not to protect the infrastructure, especially also infrastructure government. They hold up against other very well equipped criminal organizations or intelligence agencies.
Perhaps the way to go about it, Dr. Sven, is to give them a scenario and even a concrete example of what happened actually or in reality as far as national security is concerned. Let me start first. Interesting. Uh, this series that I've been watching ever since. In fact, it's the second time that I watched it. On season 7 of Homeland, there's a particular scene there. Actually, not just a scene. There are 3 instances that this information was used. No, to agitate the people and result ultimately to the weakening of the U.S. government. It started with this information as far as whether or not the son of an incoming president of the president-elect actually was a hero or not. In other words, questioning whether the actions of the son of the president-elect actually this constituted recognition by the U.S. government. And when the president-elect was able to assume presidency, there was another was this attempt at not attempt. There's another disinformation that happened, and that was the supposed deliberate effort on the part of the FBI to just allow a wounded young American to die as a result of this security issue somewhere in the northern part of America. And last but not the least, and this is no longer an issue of cybersecurity, but deliberately there was an effort to use this payment channels to funnel money from abroad and result to the assassination of a retired general who figured in the attempt to bring down U.S. Government. Now, this actually is not only possible as far as TV programs or series or movies in that case. This actually happened in the case of Brexit and also happened the first time that President Trump became president. Perhaps Dr. Sven can tell us concretely how cybersecurity threats can in fact result to a breakdown not only of law and order, but ultimately to bring down government. Dr. Smith?
We see that just alluded to the election, Brexit. The French elections were also targeted by a hacker campaign where they wanted to take Macron. We had the compromise of the Democratic Committee IT systems in the 2016 elections in the United States, which again comes to the point of Trump and the Republicans won that election, and the counterpart and the Democratic National Committee were hacked and their data was published online. The election was very close, as it was 51% or something. So, do we believe that it was that operation that brought down the Democrat candidate? It was. And personally, I think it was, because we're looking at 1.5%, right? And that margin was pretty close, that probably that operation contributed to that. We have acknowledged that, no, because we don't want to end the Russian, right? But you see it in more low-key cases, not presidential cases, right? Just look at hospitals, hospitals in Europe, in the United States. How many of them are targeted by ransomware? They have to cut off their emergency services. They have to do surgeries. It takes them weeks to restore operations. And you multiply that by 10, 20, 30, 50 hospitals targeted by cyber criminals having safety in Russia. And you can easily understand how society parts of the country can break down. And that's not a fictional case. It's happening with administrative units, like local government units all over Europe and the US, being compromised with ransomware, mostly from Russia, where they can't register anymore. They don't get the social benefits. They can't register cars. They are there at the end of the month. They are asking for the money from service to feed their families. These are very real threats that are happening right now. And so far, we've been lucky that maybe you have 2 or 3 in a smaller region that were affected at the same time. But if we go for the Russian playbook, I would go like, okay, I'll choose a region in Germany, right? And put ransomware on all the local government units in that area so they can't take over responsibilities from each other. And then in the entire area, you cannot do any administrative service anymore for days, weeks, and weeks. You throw in the mix a couple of hospitals in that area, and you have a scenario in which very real society is in trouble, and people will be affected. And that contributes to the perception that we have all over Europe also, and also, yeah, for example, where we think, oh wait, our government can't protect us anymore. I lose trust in the government. Once you start losing so much trust in your government, you're down with all very bumpy road. And I think that is one of the ways to, over time, make democracy and the democratic institutions much easier than trying to change the outcome of the election, because that's very difficult. Depending on the country and what machine things, yeah, you don't want to go into the election systems. But rather than that, having these kind of instances where society more and more loses their trust in the government to protect it, it's very powerful for those that try to erode the democratic institutions and democracy in those countries. And if you ask me, that would be my way to go about it. I would do example the Russians.
Okay, that's a very mouthful. And it would seem that we're seeing that exact formula already happening as far as the country is concerned. So, any questions from our participants on the floor now?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
First, I Valinda from Sir, I've been covering defense for quite some time now, and I've been noticing in the past, not just in the past years, it has been a trend that Philippine authorities have been intercepting time and again, not just pieces, but sets of, but ecosystems of IT equipment, mostly operated by Chinese, if I may say, mostly operated by Chinese, along with some Filipino companies. And they're mostly for business purposes, but for whatever purpose they're being used for, the specific reason for their surveillance is not. And they're mostly they're mostly operated in areas like Palawan, Zambales, Metro Manila. In particular, one of the most recent was, I think, and again, along with the boards were arrested with these sets of equipment near the Commission of Elections headquarters in Tarmugos here in Manila. So
Previous to that, it's Grande Island.
yes, yes, sir. These things that are happening, but mostly, my point is, the usual drill how they're being intercepted is that the police or the NBI or the would get it from the people, and then they would put these characters under surveillance, and then once they get a positive result in their surveys, they would cooperate. My point is they're working manually. These characters, these suspicious characters. How could cyber security help in intercepting these entities? With little, is it possible no human intervention? So it's just technology operating like this because it's been happening over and over and over. The law enforcement would present to the media the suspects that they've arrested, they've time and again they would present it to us, but then it's the same drill. They would tell us where they were found, the equipments that we have, the charges that we would face. But then again, they were intercepted manually from tip and then surveillance, and then when and they would operate them, and that's just it. How could cybersecurity help in enhancing our operations to arrest all of these people and to stop the illegal surveillance program in the Philippines because the AFP said that they believe we are being surveilled. We are being surveillanced, illegally surveillanced by other entities, and if I may say, particularly by China.
Okay, so I think I'm not quite sure which kind of surveillance we're talking about. If we're talking about laser microphones or music catchers or
Usually certain drones,
Yeah.
surveillance. I'm just not very
No, I don't want to go down the road just
Yeah.
because there's a difference in doing that. Because, for example, the thing that reconnect network traffic from your phones and through their antennas, right? They work passively. So there's nothing to do in the sense of finding them. What you can do and should do is, of course, you should use encrypted messenger, such as, Signal also, because then they will catch your traffic, but they will not be able to read messages. If you are using a public telecommunication network, a regular phone call, if that gets routed through their antenna, they can listen to the phone call. There's nothing you can do about it, unless you call it WhatsApp or you use Signal, because then the calls are encrypted and they will be able to reroute the call, but they will not be able to inside the call, right? So you would use cybersecurity in the sense of you would using better software to make calls and send messages. If, for example, we're looking at laser microphones, this is point at the window, and through vibration of the window, you can know what the people are talking about. And then there is no cybersecurity solution, but there's stuff that you can put on the windows which stops that from working. Right? So you have a physical solution to that. When we talk about drones, it's really difficult, and I think countries right now who are affected by that struggle with that. For the country, with detecting and then intercepting drones, because especially if they're commercial drones, like so many people have commercial drones, to see which ones are operated by someone where they are just having fun and someone who's actually wanting to have listening to information or reports and people. Plus, without the cyber, so you can have the usual stuff that we have also around airports, where you detect what should be there, where you have zones where there's nothing supposed to be other than the airplanes that are registered, and there's nothing else, to try to either shoot it down or catch it with another or whatever. So it depends on that equipment. But all these things are also, depending on what it is, how people carry it out. So, which also means that there's easier through cyber operations to do that, because you could do it from your home, not in the Philippines, because every time you run a phase operation, you're in the Philippines, you might get caught and get in prison. That's what kind of high stakes operation, but it also means that operations are manual, there's people running it while being physically present, which also means there's no really automatic ways of figuring that out. I mean, you have to look at specific ways like we're talking about. For some, there are cybersecurity solutions, but for things like drones or laser microphones, other sets of ways to do it.
In other words, based on the conversation, the incidents that our friend mentioned from the Netherlands suggest that whether we like it or not, traditional investigations have to work. Particularly, I'm quite familiar with what happened in Grande Island in Subic, no? It somehow alerted the authorities because, for one, they this contracted the whole island for themselves for a period of time. And second, there was increased activities of drones, and it came at the same situation where American was this maritime was this equipment are also found in Subic. So that in itself somehow is both cyber and at the same time this concrete or practical incidents of this espionage. But let me put it this way, no? Again, translating from the question asked by our friend. Is it possible for the government to, well, of course, I'm sure the government somehow, and hope, has the capability and in fact has taken it upon themselves to monitor social media traffic. And in doing so, no, takes note of what information is not real information. So it could be this, it could be mal, it could be disinformation. And based on that, identify which or where this is coming from, and at the same time determine whether the traffic is natural or, as they say, organic traffic, or this is what?
Fake.
Yeah, that's right. Traffic. So in other words, it's not really organic. It's generated by AI or generated by a troll farm and what have you. So I suppose this is a concrete example or a possible example of cybersecurity that if the government is able to track this, then there is reason for government agencies to get the people behind it responsible. Would that be possible, or is it? I suppose, of course, this depends upon the DJ if there are existing laws for that purpose. But in the case of Germany, Dr. Sven, has there been instances where this actually happened and was addressed by the government?
First of all, it's amazing because work with the companies. So the matter is not handing over data. You can't speak a lot about that because they will have the data that you. But again, some accounts need to fix somewhere. You have examples of SIM farms, the telephone SIMs in one building where they're using it to use different accounts to move some sort of narrative through social media. It's absolutely difficult to do something about it. And if it comes from outside of the country, it's also to act on it. What companies like Meta do is they write reports and they show certain patterns, certain temperatures for certain operations, so they give us what the ability to do it. But I think what would be aimed for the government would be to work together with companies and then make public what these companies discovered, where campaigns came from. I think that's one way to go on. But really, at the end of the day, trying to jail someone, that if they are abroad is very, very lengthy process, very tricky. You have the authorities in the other countries cooperate with you. And you can do that all the times, but they pop up again, it's trackable. It's nice to do that sometimes to show that you're actually doing something about it, but it's not really sustainable. Exactly.
Attorney DJ, do we have laws in that regard? Are they enough, or do we need?
These are very big.
Yeah. So in other words, we need more. So if you could define more.
If I may add, well, with the advent of AI, information, disinformation, and malinformation will be more elaborated, sophisticated in the coming years. In fact, the use of hardware, for all we know, may not be necessarily because of AI. So I think one thing to address this is to also come up with a similar AI system that would also counter measure these things. AI versus AI, if there is such a thing in the future.
No, I mean, there's experimenting with stuff that AI before. I mean, there's a stroke, right? The stroke is, 10 years ago, how did you know that the email you received is malicious? Because there's spelling mistakes. So right now, in this 2020, how do you recognize that an email is malicious? Because it doesn't have any spelling mistakes. Because it's the AI, right? So AI is possible multiplier in the sense that it lowers the entry areas that for malicious actors to disinformation or operations. It does not change the quality or the effectiveness, but it allows more quantity and more threat actors to enter that, which means you will have a problem of scale again, which you rightfully say so. We can look at development to counter it, because what is AI good at? It's good at looking at lots of data and surmising that something is benign or not. In cybersecurity, they have that for 30 years. Email, your spam. There's nothing else than a free AI kind of thing, which looked at a lot of data and determined, that's bad or that's not bad. Right?
Especially with the deep fake.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm very happy that AI came up. I mean, it's also important to note that the progression of AI and how good it gets is not a linear progression. It's 1 + 1 = 2 + 1 = 3 = 4. It's exponential. If we see how good AI has, it's scary to think how fast it's getting. The amount of people that can easily use something like this, we have prompt engineers now, a collection of words that was completely boring 5 or 6 years ago. Why did I bring this up? Because now it's being widely reported that some institutions or some groups are developing something called super intelligent AI. And if we think AI now is hard to contain, can you imagine an almost sentient piece of equipment or whatever you want to call it, that can do things that imagine all learnings of humanity in something that you can say, oh, please do this for me and tell me how to do it. How best can you do it? And basically you can get it in the span of a few moments. And basically it's even if, let's say that someone is successful and eventually the trend suggests that someone would be successful in making such a super intelligent AI. And then the cyber threats we have now are significant more. If you have such a tool like this, it would make tools like the H bomb or the bomb look cute.
Anyway, we are already talking about something very sophisticated, and I suppose not many have come to with some capacity to actually make good use of it. I have a specific question for you, Nico, without getting into specifics. Can you tell us whether or not, and perhaps you can give an example, can you tell us whether it's possible to trace this information or any kind of information, the provenance of which, and determine its, was this common people would use probably popularity, but those who understand how was this how interaction happens in the cyber side would be virality. So if we're able to determine the provenance of information, this might or this misinformation, and therefore we're able to track where it comes from and determine whether it's being propped up unusually. Does that mean that there's a possibility for the government to come up with means to address the situation?
Hypothetically, let's say that there is a capability to do this, like and then let's say somebody makes a post that's completely false, but it gains traction in the media for such an amount of time that a lot of people are talking about it. Even if people say that, oh, this is where it came and this is how we can track it. That's already in the public sphere. People are already talking about it. Therefore, for lack of a better term, the damage is done. Number one. Number two, even if you have this capability, which I'm sure there are some firms that are developing it over, the sheer amount of manpower that you need to effectively monitor stuff like this is significant. As Dr. Smith was mentioning a while ago, I don't think there's any country in the world. I have a sufficient number of people that have basically are on this.
If I may add to that, I think education. This is where education will come. I think schools and institutions, should institutionalize cyber security education. So I think earliest opportunity are people readily learn whether one is false or not. And although we have basic guidance, no? You have to check the source, you can Google search, Google fact, you could check it via some AI. But I think it would be best if our educational system will integrate cyber security and understanding malinformation, misinformation, and disinformation. We have to move on to this.
Okay, thank you, Attorney DJ. Do we still have a question from the floor? Otherwise, we have a few minutes left. Anyway, let me thank our friends for coming, especially our associates who have taken time to listen to the presentation of Dr. Sven, and of course, no less to our fellow peer founder, Professor Dr. Sven Erping, who offered and shared his expertise straight from Germany. You know, as a conclusion, let me just share with you some examples. Very recently in social media, there was this post quoting Donald Trump, saying, if there's one thing I believe in, it's standing by allies. President Duterte led his country his way, and again, this is supposed to be President Trump of the United States of America. And I respect that. I will use every diplomatic channel available to help ensure that PRRD is treated fairly and for his release from the ICC. Strong leaders deserve strong support. And you know, interestingly, what gave it away is that the logo of CPN was interestingly placed at the bottom of the post. And what I did was to repost it and tag ABS-CBN. And almost immediately, it was declared to be fake news. And there are a number of other examples, in fact. And you know what happened with that post is that suddenly it was changed into just a ribbon, which says "Bring him home," which means it was acknowledged. It was just made to mislead not only the Filipino people but even the followers of the former president himself. And interestingly, even before that, there were a series of disinformation that has been peddled around. And it's kind of amusing because they used very popular faces or figures to show that there's this doctor from ICC declaring that the former president is in fact really unable to face a trial and therefore should be sent home. And there was another, in other words, a lady and guy who are both famous, for those who are, interested in porn, that they use this, and they peddled it as if coming from coming from authorities, or in other words, not only recognizable, but the people of authority to speak about particular issues. And last but not the least, there was this so-called mayor of Eindhoven, and he was supposed to be someone called Peter Clark Starmer. And interestingly, there's no such thing as Peter Clark Starmer as a mayor of Eindhoven. And instead, the mayor of Eindhoven is Jerome Disselbloem. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. And apparently, this mayor, who is actually different from who the real mayor is, and interestingly, this time he didn't use a born actor or actress, but use a fictitious person. No? Supposedly suggests that in terms of moral ascendancy, the previous president was really reliable and therefore merits support not only of the Filipino people but everyone from around the world. I don't know whether this is just plain and simple ignorance or idiocy or stupidity, but at the very least, this is simply designed to mislead people and, in fact, convince them that they should withdraw support from the government. And I couldn't help but think that anyone or everyone responsible for this kind of misinformation is really wanting to oust the sitting legitimate president and replace it with another. It is quite difficult to determine really the responsible people for this as a result of our discussion, but I thought it might be good to mention it to just set us an example as to how difficult the challenge is faced not only by the Philippine government but the country as a whole. Because at the end of it, there's really real danger as far as cybersecurity is concerned, as far as it being a threat to national security. And we are best to sit down and discuss this soberly without political biases so that in the end, noise can be canceled and that we can talk about numbers and what matters most and develop real responses and solutions to threats and issues. Yun lang po, magandang hapon. And as I always end my discussion, sana meron po kayong napulot kahit katitid sa aming bunting tahan. Salamat po.